At Harrington Vale, the morning began with whispers before it found its light. Mist clung to the gravel courtyard like a held breath, and beneath the arched windows of the great house, men gathered in uneasy clusters, their voices low, their shoulders tense. At the center of their unease stood the Duke's black stallion, a towering creature of muscle and rage, its hide dark as wet ink, its eyes white-rimmed with fury. Iron-shod hooves struck stone again and again, each impact echoing like a warning bell through the sleeping estate. They called the horse sovereign, though no man had ever ruled him. 3 grooms bore scars to prove it, and one lay still abed, his arm bound and useless, after yesterday's attempt. The Duke watched now from the steps, tall and immaculately dressed, his gloved hands folded behind his back. He did not flinch when the horse reared. He did not speak. His silence carried more weight than any shouted command. Eliza Moore stood at the far edge of the courtyard, half hidden beside a rain barrel, her hands red and raw from the morning cold. She had risen before dawn, as she always did, to scrub and carry and keep herself unnoticed. That had been her talent since girlhood, to move through the world without leaving a mark. The women of the house barely remembered her name. The men spoke past her as if she were furniture. It was safer that way. A laugh broke from one of the stable lads, sharp and unkind. "She ought to try her hand," he said, nodding toward Eliza. "Perhaps the beast will die of boredom." Another joined in, and soon the sound spread, brittle and cruel. Eliza kept her eyes lowered, though heat crept up her neck. She had learned long ago that silence was a shield, even when it felt like a wound. The Duke turned at the sound of laughter. His gaze swept the yard, cool and assessing, before settling briefly on Eliza. For a moment, something unreadable passed across his face, then it was gone. "Enough," he said quietly. The word fell like a blade. The laughter ceased at once. Work resumed, though tension remained coiled in the air. Eliza was sent to fetch water, then hay, then tools no one truly needed. Each errand carried her closer to the stallion's enclosure, and with each step her awareness sharpened. She did not see a monster where others did. She saw a creature trembling with a terror it did not know how to survive. Her foot slipped on the damp stone, and the bucket tipped, water spilling across the ground. The sound startled the horse into fresh fury. He lunged against the rails, wood splintering beneath his weight. A groom cried out. Someone cursed Eliza's name. "I am sorry," she murmured, though no one listened. The Duke's eyes found her again, this time with unmistakable severity. Shame pressed down on her chest, heavy and familiar. She bent to gather the fallen bucket, her hands shaking. "You are dismissed from the yard," the Duke said. "Go." There was no anger in his tone, only finality. Eliza obeyed at once, retreating with her head bowed, the whispers following like thrown stones. She did not go far. From the shadowed archway, she paused and looked back. The stallion had gone strangely still, his head lowered, his breath steaming in the cold air. For an instant, his gaze met hers. The noise of the yard faded, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile as glass. Behind her, the Duke spoke again, his voice carrying across the stones. "No one approaches him again," he said, louder now, for all to hear. "I will not have another life risked for pride." The men nodded, relief and fear mingling on their faces. Eliza turned away, her heart pounding. Yet even as she walked, she felt the weight of that shared glance, and knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that the most dangerous thing in Harrington Vale was not the horse, but the silence that bound them both. By the time Eliza reached the narrow servants' corridor, her composure had fractured. The walls there were close and unadorned, smelling faintly of soap and damp wool, and they offered no room for pretense. She pressed her palm to her mouth, steadying her breath, and listened as the distant sounds of the yard resumed without her. It was always this way, the world correcting itself once she stepped aside. From a high window at the corridor's end, she could still see the paddock. The Duke stood alone now, the others dismissed, his silhouette stark against the pale sky. He rested a hand on the rail, close enough for danger, and for the first time she saw fatigue touch his bearing. It struck her then that his authority was a kind of armor, polished daily, never removed. The stallion stamped once, then fell quiet again. Eliza's breath caught. She had seen men strike and shout, had seen ropes and iron and blood, but she had also seen how the horse flinched at sudden noise, how his ears strained toward gentler sounds. No one had cared to notice. No one but her. A footstep echoed behind her, and Eliza started, retreating into herself once more. "You linger," said Mrs. Grant, the housekeeper, her mouth thin with disapproval. "Mind your place, girl. Curiosity has ruined better than you." "Yes, ma'am," Eliza replied, lowering her eyes. Yet even as she spoke, her gaze drifted back to the window, to the solitary figures bound by distance and fear. Outside, the Duke straightened, his jaw set. He glanced toward the archway, toward the shadows where Eliza had stood, though she was gone now. His hand tightened on the rail, and his voice carried faintly on the air, meant for no one and everyone alike. "He will break us all," he said. In the dim corridor, Eliza closed her eyes, sensing that silence itself had just shifted. The days that followed did not soften Harrington Vale. If anything, they sharpened it. Word of the Duke's decree traveled swiftly, carried on the tongues of maids and the raised brows of visiting gentlemen. The horse remained confined, restless but untouched, and the Duke withdrew further into himself. His presence felt more than seen. For Eliza, the estate narrowed, each corridor thick with glances that lingered a moment too long, each silence edged with implication. Yet silence, she had learned, could also be an invitation. Before dawn on the third morning, when the house still slept and the lamps burned low, Eliza slipped from the servant's wing and crossed the dew-dark grass toward the paddock. The air smelled of earth and rain, and her heart beat with a fear that was not regret. She carried nothing in her hands, not even gloves, only the quiet resolve that had steadied her since childhood. She stopped well short of the rails and waited, allowing her presence to be known without demand. The stallion shifted, nostrils flaring. His ears pinned back, then eased. Eliza spoke then, not to command but to exist, her voice scarcely louder than the wind brushing the hedges. She spoke of ordinary things, the weather, the sound of the river beyond the fields, the way dawn always came whether one was ready or not. The horse's breath slowed. He did not advance, nor did he retreat. It was enough. She returned the next morning, and the next. Each visit ended the same way. No touch, no triumph, only a fragile truce. It was on the fifth day that someone noticed. A young footman, bleary-eyed and eager for importance, saw her standing there in the half-light. By breakfast, the kitchen hummed with it. By luncheon, the whispers had reached the drawing-room. By evening, the story had grown teeth. Eliza was reckless. Eliza was ambitious. Eliza believed herself chosen. She felt the change immediately. Tasks once given without thought were reassigned pointedly. Mrs. Grant's approval cooled into suspicion. When Eliza entered a room, conversation faltered, then resumed at a lower pitch. Shame pressed close again, but it no longer bent her spine. The Duke encountered her at twilight, near the stable doors. He had dismissed the grooms early, and the yard lay empty but for them. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his composed features. "You were warned," he said. "I was dismissed from the yard," Eliza replied carefully. "Not from the dawn." Something like reluctant amusement touched his mouth, then vanished. "You take liberties." "I take care," she answered. He studied her as one might study a lock whose key had gone missing. "He has not harmed you." "No." "Nor allowed you near." "No." The pause stretched, taut and dangerous. At last, the Duke inclined his head. "Be gone before you are seen." She obeyed, but as she passed him, he spoke again, so softly she nearly missed it. "Tomorrow, at first light, remain where you are." She did not look back. The following morning, he watched from a distance as she stood once more at the rail. The stallion approached her then, not in submission, but in inquiry, lowering his massive head until his breath stirred her hair. The Duke felt something shift, unsettling and profound. That evening, a small parcel appeared on Eliza's narrow bed. It contained a pair of riding gloves, soft with wear, and a book whose margins bore careful notes in a precise hand. Inside the cover, a single line was written, for patience where force failed. She did not ask who had sent it. She did not need to. The gloves were noticed 2 days later. A lady's maid recognized them at once, having seen their match in the Duke's possession. The book was glimpsed beneath Eliza's arm in the corridor. Speculation hardened into certainty. Scandal bloomed. At dinner, Eliza felt the weight of eyes upon her like heat. Later, Mrs. Grant cornered her, voice sharp as vinegar. "You forget yourself. Gratitude is not entitlement. You will ruin what little standing you possess." "I know my place," Eliza said quietly. "Then remember it." That night, the horse bowed his great head when she approached, and the watching groom crossed himself. News raced ahead of dawn. By morning, the Duke could no longer pretend ignorance. As he stood at the paddock, hearing the murmurs gather beyond the gates, he understood that the danger had shifted. It was no longer the horse that threatened them, but what obedience revealed. The summons came without ceremony, delivered by a boy who would not meet her eyes. Eliza was told only that the Duke wished to see her, and that it was to be private. The word itself settled heavily upon her shoulders as she followed the familiar path toward the stables, her thoughts a tangle of fear and resolve. Twilight blurred the edges of Harrington Vale, softening stone and shadow alike, and the air carried the clean ache of approaching rain. He waited inside the long stable, lantern light throwing gold across the wooden beams. The horse stood at the far end, calm now, his great body a dark certainty in the dimness. The Duke did not turn at once when Eliza entered. He seemed carved from the stillness, one gloved hand resting against the stall door, his head bowed as if in thought or prayer. "You should not have been asked here," he said at last. "Yet here you are." "I was told you wished it," Eliza replied. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. He turned then, and the distance between them felt charged, deliberate. "You have made yourself the subject of considerable talk." "So I have heard." "You risk much," he continued. "For what purpose, I cannot yet discern." Eliza folded her hands before her. "I did not seek notice." "No," he said softly. "It seems it sought you." The horse shifted, the sound of leather and breath punctuating the silence. The Duke gestured toward the stall. "He was not always so," he said. "Once, he trusted readily. I trusted him in return." His gaze hardened, though his voice did not. "That trust was broken. By my hand, as much as any other." Eliza listened, sensing the cost of the admission. "Fear teaches harsh lessons," she said. "It teaches us to strike before we are struck." "And you?" he asked. "What has fear taught you?" She hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. "To endure, to listen, to remain." The Duke studied her, something restless stirring beneath his composure. "You speak as though you believe endurance a virtue." "I believe it a necessity," she replied. "One that can be set aside, when gentleness is allowed." He laughed then, once, without mirth. "Gentleness," he echoed, as if tasting a forgotten word. "I have ruled by command since I was a boy. It was expected. It was praised." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No one ever thanked me for mercy." Eliza met his gaze. Then they were poorer for it. The space between them narrowed, not by movement but by recognition. The lantern flickered, casting their shadows long and intertwined against the wall. The horse lowered his head, ears angled toward them, as if drawn by the cadence of their voices. "You have done what none other could," the Duke said. "Without rope or spur. Without fear." His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Tell me how." "I cannot," Eliza answered. "It is not a thing that can be taught, only offered." Silence followed, deep and searching. At last, he reached into his coat and withdrew the book she had been given. "I watched you read this," he said. "You read as though each word were a promise." "Words can be," she said, "if one keeps them." His hand trembled slightly as he held the book. "Stand with me," he said suddenly. "Not in secret." before them all. Let them see what I have failed to master. Eliza's breath caught. She understood at once the cost of such a choice. If I falter, she said, I will bear the blame alone. No, he replied, and his voice carried a force she had not yet heard. If you fall, I will fall with you. Eliza felt the weight of his request settle fully then, not as flattery but as burden. You ask me to stand where I have never been permitted, she said. To be seen is not safety for someone like me. Nor is it for someone like me, he answered. I have been seen all my life, and rarely known. He removed his gloves, setting them aside as if discarding a title. They call me formidable. They do not ask what it has cost. The rain began softly upon the roof, a hush that wrapped the stable in intimacy. Eliza allowed herself to look at him fully, at the fine lines etched by restraint, at the loneliness he carried with practiced elegance. You are not cruel, she said. You are afraid of what softness might undo. His breath left him in a slow exhale. If I allow this, he said, there will be no retreat. There never is, she replied. Outside, a distant door closed, reminding them of the world beyond the lantern's circle. The Duke straightened, resolve hardening his features once more. Then it shall be done, he said. And whatever follows, we will meet it openly. Eliza inclined her head, a gesture both respectful and equal. She felt changed already, as if a door long closed had been set ajar, letting in both light and cold. She did not know what awaited her beyond it, only that turning back was no longer possible. The horse stepped forward, closing the distance at last. Eliza lifted her hand, palm open, and he breathed against it, warm and steady. The Duke watched, something unguarded breaking through his reserve. Tomorrow, he said, at the hour of their choosing. Eliza nodded, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the weight of what had been entrusted to her. As she turned to leave, the Duke spoke her name for the first time. She paused, and in that pause, the world seemed to hold its breath. In that charged stillness, Eliza sensed the fragile future tightening around them both, a future born of trust, watched by shadows, and already threatening to upend every careful boundary they had survived together now. He obeys you, he said. Perhaps it is time I learned to do the same. The gathering was announced as a demonstration, though no one believed that word alone. Carriages lined the gravel drive from mid-morning onward, wheels crunching with anticipation. Ladies arrived wrapped in silk and curiosity, their gloved hands fluttering like restrained birds. Gentlemen dismounted with measured interest, their gazes already drifting toward the paddock. Harrington Vale had not felt so awake in years, and beneath the polite greetings ran a sharper current. Something was about to be decided. Eliza stood at the edge of the enclosure, the ground firm beneath her boots, the sky pale and undecided above. She wore no finery, only a plain dress and the riding gloves she had been given, now creased by use. Murmurs followed her as she took her place, not cruel this time, but wary, as if the crowd feared being proven wrong. She kept her eyes forward, her posture calm, though her heart beat with deliberate force. The Duke arrived last. His presence stilled the noise as surely as a raised hand. He dismounted and crossed the grass with unhurried purpose, his expression unreadable. When he reached the rail, he did not look at the assembled guests at once. He looked at Eliza. The brief meeting of their gazes carried more weight than any vow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying without effort, "you have been invited to witness what many of you have called folly." A ripple of restrained laughter followed. He waited for it to pass. "You have seen my horse fail every measure of control. You have seen men injured and confidence broken. Today, you will see the cause was never the beast." A groom led Sovereign forward. The horse's great frame moved with measured power, his coat gleaming, his eyes alert but no longer wild. A collective breath was drawn as Eliza stepped closer, alone, without lead or bridle. She felt the weight of every gaze, the echo of every whispered doubt, but she did not slow. Sovereign halted before her. For a suspended instant, nothing happened. Then Eliza lifted her hand, palm open, and spoke his name as one might speak to a wounded friend. The horse lowered his head, the massive curve of his neck bowing, and a sound passed through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Gasps followed. A lady pressed her hand to her mouth. A gentleman swore under his breath. Eliza moved then, walking slowly, and the horse walked with her, matching her pace, his obedience unmistakable. She turned, and he turned. She stopped, and he stilled. Each motion stripped another layer from the skepticism that had gathered there. The Duke stepped forward at last, his boots sounding softly on the grass. He did not touch the horse. He did not interrupt the quiet authority unfolding before him. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more personal. "This woman has mastered what I could not," he said. "Not by force, but by mercy." The silence that followed was profound. Eliza felt it settle over her like a cloak, heavy and irrevocable. She stood very still, her hand resting lightly against Sovereign's cheek, grounding herself in the warmth of his breath. Questions stirred, but none were voiced. The Duke turned to the crowd, his posture straight, his gaze unflinching. "I will not pretend this pleases all of you," he continued. "Nor will I pretend to care. What has been proven here today will not be undone by whispers." A murmur rose, uncertain and divided. Eliza sensed the shift, the moment teetering between acceptance and backlash. She withdrew her hand and stepped back, offering the Duke space, though every instinct urged her to remain. He did not let her retreat far. "Eliza Moore," he said clearly. Hearing her name spoken so publicly struck her like a bell. "Stand with me." She obeyed, crossing the grass to his side. The proximity was electric, not with impropriety, but with recognition. He did not reach for her hand. He did not need to. "This estate," he said, "has long prided itself on appearances. Today, I choose truth." A lady's fan snapped shut. A man shifted, displeased. The Duke seemed to grow taller beneath their scrutiny. "From this moment," he said, "no slight against her will be tolerated as sport or tradition. She stands here by my invitation and my regard." Eliza felt the words settle into her bones. Dignity, long denied, unfurled slowly, cautiously. She met the eyes turned upon her, not in defiance, but in quiet steadiness. Sovereign knelt then, the massive creature folding to the ground with solemn grace. The sound that followed was not applause, but something deeper, a collective release of tension. The Duke allowed himself a breath, the faintest curve of pride touching his mouth. Yet even as the moment crystallized, Eliza sensed the cost still waiting. Triumph did not erase memory. Mercy did not dissolve hierarchy overnight. She glanced at the Duke, searching his face for hesitation, for retreat. There was none. He turned to her, his voice lowered, meant only for her ears, though it carried the weight of promise. "This was only the beginning." Eliza nodded, her throat tight, understanding that the true reckoning had not yet arrived, only changed its form. As the crowd began to disperse, conversation buzzing with new fervor, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had been seen, claimed, elevated, yet the path ahead remained uncertain, steeped in consequence. The Duke remained beside her, his presence steady, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the road disappeared beyond the trees. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they will demand more." Eliza followed his gaze, feeling both fear and resolve take root. She did not step away. Morning arrived without celebration, as though Harrington Vale itself waited to see which way the world would turn. The dew lay thick on the lawns, muffling footsteps, and the house breathed quietly, its grandeur momentarily subdued. Eliza stood at her narrow window, watching the mist lift, aware that she could no longer return to the life she had known. Visibility, once granted, could not be revoked without cost. The cost arrived swiftly. By noon, letters had come, polite in script, sharp in intent. Invitations were withdrawn. Visits postponed indefinitely. A distant cousin wrote to the Duke with concern thinly veiled as reproach. Eliza heard none of it directly, yet she felt the shift in the house as surely as a change in weather. Servants spoke less freely. Eyes measured her anew, not with contempt now, but with calculation. She went to the paddock regardless. Sovereign greeted her with a soft huff, his head lifting at her approach. She rested her forehead briefly against his neck, drawing comfort from the steady certainty of him. Where once there had been violence, there was now calm, and in that transformation she saw her own reflected back to her. Footsteps approached across the grass. The Duke came without escort, his coat unfastened, his expression unguarded in a way she had never seen before. He stopped a short distance away, as though unsure whether to cross it. "They have made their displeasure known," he said. "So I imagined," Eliza replied. He studied her, searching for regret. Finding none, he exhaled slowly. "You are free to leave," he said. "With provision. With protection. I would not see you suffer for my choosing." Eliza straightened, her hand still resting on the horse. "And you?" she asked. "I will endure," he said simply. "It is expected of me." She turned then, meeting his gaze fully. "Endurance is not the same as living." Something in him yielded at that. He crossed the remaining distance, stopping close enough that she could see the fine wear at the edges of his composure. "If I ask you to remain," he said, "it will not be as spectacle, nor as proof. It will be as partner, in all that word implies." The air seemed to still around them. Eliza felt the weight of the choice settle, not as fear, but as clarity. "If I remain," she said, "it will not be in shadow." "I would not ask it," he replied. "Nor would I accept it." Beyond the paddock, a carriage rolled past without stopping, its curtains drawn. Eliza watched it go, then looked back at the man who had altered her fate with a single refusal to look away. "They will never forgive me," she said. "They may never forgive me either," he answered. "But forgiveness has rarely built anything worth keeping." He reached for her hand then, openly, before the house, before the sky. His touch was warm, certain, unafraid. Eliza felt something within her settle into place, long restless, now resolved. That evening, the Duke dined alone, as he had many nights before, but this time Eliza sat across from him, not hidden, not waiting. Conversation flowed quietly, thoughtfully, shaped by mutual regard rather than performance. The house listened, as houses do, absorbing the change into its walls. When night fell, the lamps were lit along the drive, and Sovereign was led to pasture, his steps untroubled, his head high. Eliza watched him go, understanding that not all endings required departure. Some required presence. Later, standing at the threshold of the great house, she hesitated. The Duke noticed at once. "You doubt," he said. "I consider," she replied. "I have lived my life preparing for refusal. Acceptance is a skill I am still learning." He smiled then, not the practiced curve of society, but something genuine and unguarded. "Then we will learn together." Word traveled beyond Harrington Vale in the days that followed, reshaped and retold, but always returning to the same truth: the Duke had chosen. Some called it folly, others rebellion. Eliza called it courage. On a morning much like the first, mist rising and birdsong tentative, they walked the ground side by side. There were no crowds now, no declarations to be made. Only the quiet work of becoming something new. At the paddock gate, the Duke paused. "There will be challenges yet," he said. "This world does not loosen its grip easily." Eliza squeezed his hand. "Nor do I." Sovereign lifted his head as they approached, ears forward, attentive. Eliza stepped ahead, and the horse followed, obedient not from fear, but from trust freely given. The Duke watched them, understanding at last that power did not lie in command, but in the courage to kneel, to listen, to choose love over reverence. As the sun broke fully through the mist, Harrington Vale stood changed, not by conquest, but by quiet defiance, and the road ahead, though uncertain, no longer led them apart, but forward together, into a future neither had dared to claim until now.